Nice to see you all. Got it. All right. Good to have everybody. It's let's see, 2 weeks before Christmas. We're going strong. Revelation chapter 6. Woohoo. Let's pray, and then we'll read, and then we'll talk, and then somebody smarter than all of us will talk, and that's how it always works. Well, smarter than let's see, than me anyway. I don't know about all of us. Thank you, Father, for this day. We are grateful that you bless us with life again. Thank you for churches that continue to sanctify us, even in their messiness. We thank you for community groups like this, where we can study together and think things through and imagine and spur each other on to good thinking and good works. Help us see Revelation well today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Revelation. Oh my goodness. I didn't bring my
Bible. No.
We'll do it in Greek. Everybody ready? Someone else is going to have to read the Bible today, unless you want me to try in Greek and translate, but it's been a really long time. Let's not do that. So who's got a good version of the Bible, chapter 6? I actually have it here on paper, but let's let someone else do it anyway. Chapter 6. And here's what I want you to do.
I've only got a mediocre version. It's the NIV. So
NIV is a fantastic version, not mediocre. Very good version. Any of your actual versions are pretty good. We haven't talked about that here, but if you're wondering what's the best, there's no answer to that. Okay, if you've got an RSV, a KJV, an NIV, a new Revised Standard, a new King James Version, a new American Standard, they're all fine. They'll all do.
Well, if you're going Old Testament, I'm a particular fan of the complete Jewish Bible translation. It's pretty cool. So,
yeah.
The CJB, you got to get it like on the Bible apps.
I don't even know that one. Generally, the Jerusalem one is called the Jewish version is called the Jerusalem Bible, JB. So I don't know that one. So good. All right. So here's what I want you to do. Who's going to read it first? Who's with their greatest powerful voice? Okay, Josh is going to do the reading. And as you're doing this, I want you to jot down something or hold on to something in your head. Grab a few ideas, questions that you would want to ask. As soon as we're done with this, I'm going to write a bunch of questions on the board, and then we're going to seek to answer some of them. Maybe not all of them, and they don't have to be questions that you don't know the answer to. Maybe it's just a really good question, but you've read this book before and you've thought it through and you know the answer, but you think it's a worthy question. I think questions is how we're really helped in exegesis. And also, it's right on the Facebook page, right? This is a class. This is a community group where we ask questions. You're allowed to ask questions. You'll be like, this doesn't make any sense, right? Why is there a dragon chasing a child and streaming water down the road and the earth swallowing it up, and the woman grows wings on her back and flies away? That's chapter 12. What in the world's happening? Or what in the world is happening with this red horse? Is the white horse? Well, you have to ask you'll ask the questions. So let's read this wonderful text. Go ahead, Josh.
Okay, Revelation chapter 6, the book opened. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and behold, white horse. Is there somebody we can mute? It's really distracting.
I think it's Travis's kids.
Thank you. Sorry, Travis. I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it with a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. When he broke the 2nd seal, I heard one second living creature saying, "Come!" And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another. And a great sword was given to him. When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat and a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley and a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine. When the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, come. I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was flowing from him. Authority was given to him over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and with wild beasts of the earth. When the Lamb broke the 5th seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God, and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood of the blood of those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of the fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. And I looked when he broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black, and sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it was rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?
Sweet. All right. That is a powerful text. That is some kind of fun. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Just in time, here's Andrew Steiner to tell us everything we need to know. Andrew, can you interpret that text for us, sir? I'm just messing with you, Andrew.
No.
Oh, Stephanie, can you? Yeah, all right. We just read Revelation chapter 6, and now it's question time. What are a bunch of the things that you would want to talk about here? You want to know about? Come on, there's lots of questions here.
Yeah, what's the deal with the horses? Their color, and they keep talking about different numbers of them, and it seems like they skip them as what their meanings are. I've never understood that.
All right, meaning, got it. Color, meaning, yep.
Why did the earth get destroyed? And yet everybody's hiding in caves, but there's earthquakes and the sky disappears. How can you hide in a cave if there's an earthquake? Isn't that the last place you'd want to go?
Okay. Why is the earth destroyed? Why are they hiding in caves during an earthquake?
They asked the age-old question in there, holy and true master, how long will you wait before you pass judgment? I know you're going to answer that. There's a lot of judgment that needs to be passed on a lot of people. When's he going to do it?
All right, good. Yeah.
That's the one. You answer that one today. Now let's go with that one.
We'll answer how long. It's very obvious in the text, so we'll tell you exactly how long.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
With the third living creature, there's a rider on it, and we're talking about, wages and different wages there. What's the reason behind that? What is that referencing?
Okay. Yeah. Dealing with the wine and the bread and the oil. Sorry, the oil and the bread, which might be wine, but yeah.
Is there in verse 9, is there an assumption that those who are not who have passed away are waiting at an altar? Is that where we're going when we die, to wait for the second coming? Are we at the feet of Jesus saying, "How long, O Lord, till you avenge us"?
Okay. All right, verse 9. We got the dead people around an altar saying, "How long?" And is that us? Okay. Or future us, or something.
Are we going to be looking for these things? Should we be looking for these things? Like, is to say that it's the end times? We're looking for this apocalyptic language. This blood, is the moon going to become like blood? Are the stars really going to fall from the earth or from the sky? Excuse me. Is this just a type of language or a literature, or is this really going to literally happen?
Okay. Blood moons, blackened sun, and stars falling. What the heck is happening there? Sounds like the end of the world. You're definitely not going to be in any caves if that's happening. Yep. So this is what you do. Like, this is a great way to practice exegetical work, right? Is to read slowly, to take each verse and say, "Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals." And you then ask, what's a seal? What are we talking about? And you already know the answer to that. I get it. But what is it? Why are there 7? I heard one of the 4 living creatures. What are the 4 living creatures? Let's remember what chapter 5 was about, right? What's happening with each one of these things? Why is his voice thunderous? Is this just a powerful thing? Why does he say come? What's he asking for? Twice he says come. Why? Actually, 3 times, 4 times, looking down. Each time he says come. And then why is one red? And you ask that, the colors. Why is one ashen or pale? Why is one white? White sounds good, not bad. What's going on with that? Let's see. And you asked about the wine, the wheat and the barley and the oil. And I'm just really quickly, the altar, the souls. Yeah, are they corporeal? Are these like, how are they around the altar if they're dead people? Do people have bodies? Is this telling us something about our bodies or our souls that are somehow our souls are able to cry out, but they don't have voice box? What's happening with all of that? What's the vengeance? Is God a vengeful God in verse 10? Why a white robe? We think we understand some of these symbols, but maybe we don't. Right? We should ask what they mean in this particular context. Verse 11. Why are they resting? Told to rest a little longer. Doesn't sound like they're resting at all. What are they resting? Till the fellow number is complete. Okay, we got it. You got a bunch of the questions. So now let's start walking through it slowly and hearing a little bit of commentary and bringing you guys into it. And I asked Travis to lead this part. So he's the guy who's the smartest in the room right now because he read a bunch of books on it. So Travis, help us out.
All right. So I was like checking my boxes with your questions to see if I got them all. And I think I got most of them. So we'll see.
Good.
First thing I had to start with is what's the significance of opening the seals? Like just practically speaking. I think we talked about this last time, but anybody thoughts on like there's an obvious like design here. Why would he choose to use a seal? What's the seal on?
It's on a scroll and can't open it till all 7 seals are open.
Right. And so the purpose of it is to be able to read what's on the scroll.
Right.
You have to remove the seals. And yeah, we'd have to remove all 7 in real life. On this one, we start to see little glimpses after each one. It's like one gets broken and we see, then the second one gets broken and we see. In real life, you'd have to break all 7 before you see anything because they're all holding back the same document unless there's something underneath of that one seal. To kind of a sign that this is obviously, you know, still a trippy vision and for literary purposes, because we're not actually going to be able to read a scroll with 7 seals if just one of them is broken.
So that tells you
Just a
right
little
from the beginning, we're talking about something literature, like it's not. Yeah, you can't do it, but you get the idea. I'm with you.
All right, so a little bit of structure. Nobody asked about this one, but before we jump into it, chapters 5:1 through 8:1, parallel 8:2 through 8:11 in Revelation. Fun fact. There's a lot of parallels. There is an opening scene followed by 6 judgments, or sometimes could be referred to as something other than a judgment, followed by an interlude, which promises care for God's people, and then the 7th judgment. In the judgment / whatever else you would like to call it, the first 4 all have an inner unity. There's 4 horsemen in the first set, 4 trumpets in the second set. So just some fun literary stuff for you to lay some background. And we'll get to 8 later. But
Is there no parallel?
so what was that?
What about the bowls? Are they?
Oh, yeah, and there's 4 bowls. Yeah, there's the bowls as well. Yeah, sorry, did I not say that?
Yep. So all 3 of them. Okay. Yep.
So then what are the 4 horsemen? And, you know, there's all sorts of fun options here. Let me see. Here's one from my wife that she wanted to make sure she got credit for. The 4 of the apocalypse.
Nice.
Jose, Johnny, Jim, and Jack. So, or it's not that one. Maybe it is this one over here. Let's see. Hold on. That'd be fun to play with Zoom a little today. Maybe it's these guys. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Or maybe it's these 4, according to this gun shop from North Carolina. So for our North Carolina folks.
Nice.
Or maybe it's none of those, but just for fun. The horsemen we talked about, let me get back to my notes after all that fun jumping around. Does anybody want to go to Zechariah 6? It's towards the back of your Old Testament. It's one of the lesser prophets. If not, I've got it here. If anybody has a hard time flipping to it. All right, Zechariah 6, 1 through 3 is all I'm going to read. The title is The 4 Chariots. I looked up again, and there before me were 4 chariots coming out from between 2 mountains, mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second black, the third white, and the 4th dappled, all of them powerful. So multiple of the commentators I read said that this kind of goes back to that. They didn't say a lot of why or not, but like this is obviously pulling some of this Old Testament language potentially, or is it a big coincidence? I don't know. None of them go into a lot of detail on that. Jace, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that as the Old Testament guy in the room, but it's definitely a heck of a coincidence. They almost match, not quite. The dappled and ashen are slightly different, but otherwise they match.
What are they supposed to be in Zechariah? That's what I can't remember.
I believe in Zechariah, they end up afflicting a judgment on, let me find it. I flipped away from it, of course.
And that's pretty normal. So when you have chariots and horses, right, that's like war. It's some sort of
Right.
judgment on a city. They're coming down, strength, terror, warfare, conquest, those kinds of ideas. So that would make sense that, and for,
The four spirits of heaven going out from standing in the presence of the Lord of the whole world.
You're right.
One go and they go to the four directions of the compass.
Right.
and remember, Dr. Dalrymple was talking about the four, how four is a symbol pretty consistently of the four corners of the earth, of the four winds, or the four angels that are standing there. It's supposed to represent the entire earth. So, yep, cool. Zechariah, I'm in. Keep going.
And they are to bring judgment on those who oppressed Judah, is where they were going out to the four directions of the compass, was the context in Zechariah. So a lot of people that really favor this is a judgment from God, like to look at Zechariah. Dr. Dalrymple has a different way of looking at this, which we'll get to here in a little bit. So let's go ahead and jump into the first horse. The first horse is what color?
And
Wait.
White.
White.
That is correct. And so there's three different.
But it had a
views that-
bow. Never mind.
He does have a bow. Yeah.
This rider has a bow and a
Yes.
crown.
He also has a crown.
Mhm.
So there's three different views for this. Two of them consider this to be Christ, and then the last one thinks it's actually a false Christ. The two for Christ are it's Christ at his first coming, or the second one is Christ at his second coming, and then the third being that it's a false Christ. The idea with the Christ is that it's Christ conquering through his gospel. What leads me to think that it's probably the false Christ more is that Christ has a sword, not a bow. And that also to have an inner unity of the four horses, the next three are all going to wreak havoc and not advance the gospel. So that doesn't really seem to fit if there's going to be an inner unity amongst the four. But some people subscribe to that viewpoint. If you go with the false Christ thing, in addition to white being a sign of purity or victory, which victory is probably the more likely here because it's referred to as a conquest, is this horse, or war is another way to look at it. But you could also see some deception with the whole false Christ idea. The bow, for fun context, might be a little reminder to the people in the churches of the Parthian archers that were actually threatening the Eastern Roman boundary, which wasn't that far from the edge of Asia Minor. Well, it was the edge of Asia Minor. So I've got a little map here I can share you. So over here was the Parthian boundary with the Roman Empire. The churches are just over in here. So it's not that far away. So could be a deliberate reference to the bows of their enemies. And how even the great Roman Empire was not as stable as it might seem. Anything else that jumps out from anybody for this white horse, or thoughts on all those things that I just said? Talking.
My translation of the NASB, recommended by Dr. Dalrymple, and it says on the top, the heading, it says the false Christ. So that, I think that makes a huge difference whether or not we see this as the true Christ or the false Christ. It's kind of a, I think, to me, that makes it's a big deal to have. It baffles me why there's a miscommunication there as to whether it's false or true Christ.
So are you saying it seems very clear to you which one it is, Josh?
Well, yeah, it's clear just because of the heading. I mean, I don't know why it's unclear. Right, I'm asking why. I'm wondering why it's unclear. Actually, I'm inquiring why it's unclear to the scholars or to anyone.
Well, keep in mind, I mean, I know you know this, but maybe not everyone does. Those headings are just put in by interpreters of today.
Right.
I know you know. I just wanted to make it very clear. That's not Bible. That's just someone's guess. But
Yeah,
the question is, why is it not clear? Like,
Yeah, that's
because that interpretation that Travis gave of it being Christ goes back to like the 2nd century. Irenaeus is one of the first ones to say, this is definitely Christ. And then if you're reading in Revelation, chapter 19 has Jesus appear on a white horse. So if we're
Right.
talking about context, like there's only 2 places somebody on a white horse comes up. And the second time it's definitely Jesus. Granted, he's got a sword, which goes the other direction, you know, in chapter 19. And not just a sword, remember, not a sword for killing, but a sword that's coming out of his mouth. So it's that, but still, I mean, there's only 2 white horses that show up there. And the difference between, I think, verse 1 here, verse 1, is it verse 1? Yeah, verse 2. Verse 2 and the other ones, or the first rider and the other riders, is there's not much said about the guy on the white horse. Like there's not 3 verses following that talk about Hades following, or plagues and pestilence and all the other things. It's just kind of like here he is. So it might be like Jesus is the rider on the white horse, and then he brings these other 3 with them, and they bring things with them. So
Well, it also
one bringing the judgment, and Travis is going to talk about that, whether it's a judgment or not. But
there's
like,
one difference is there's one other difference is this particular rider has a voice of thunder, and I may be wrong on this, but I don't see the other ones have. It says one of the 4 living creatures saying as with a voice of thunder, come. The other ones just say a voice. I don't know, a creature saying. So I mean that goes back to your question about the thunder. What is this thunder, voice of thunder, and why? I mean,
yeah, so the first announcer has more power than the others, it sounds like, when the voice of thunder. Yeah. And of course, horses that are white. I mean, white usually means right. It's not, you know, it's a good picture in Revelation. Right? So it's righteousness. And
another context for the white. Another context for the white is it's the 4 horses, or the horses that the Roman generals would ride in on after winning wars, back in the context. And then also another distinction between this Christ and the Christ in 19 is this Christ has a crown. The Christ in 19 has many crowns. So in addition to the sword bow distinction. But yeah, I mean, so where a lot of the Christ interpretation comes is, I think it's preterism that you're talking about with Irenaeus. And then the other one is dispensationalism and the whole second coming thing, which is a viewpoint. Preterism is maybe a more respected one, but
what's preterism? I'm sorry, I've never heard that word.
It's preterism. Preterism is the understanding that most of the book of Revelation has already been fulfilled. That would be a full preterist, but people could be partial preterists and say the vast majority of it has been fulfilled, but there's a little bit still left. So I would put myself in the partial preterist camp, probably. That a good portion of it, most of it, has already taken place. Like all the things Travis is talking about today, I think have taken place.
Is juxtaposed to that is dispensationalism, and those opposite side of the spectrum.
Things to come.
Yeah, very futurist.
Yeah,
almost all futurist.
Okay.
So the viewpoint where it's the second coming is dispensational, the first coming is the other.
Now, see, dispensational I've heard of, because that's kind of more the common mainstream.
Dispensational is going to be the popular thing you're going to see in Left Behind, or if you read Hal Lindsey in its heyday in the late 70s.
Yeah.
That's all going to be that stuff. Tim LaHaye, Jerry Jenkins, whatever movie you see about people not being able to fly airplanes.
History Channel.
Yeah, that's dispensation.
And basically, my understanding of those interpretations are they just kind of rely on the vagueness and ignore the discrepancies. As best as I can understand them, that's probably not doing them fair credit, but you know,
Yeah, and let's be very clear. Just because I just made fun of that with all those movies and stuff like that, there are legit whole field, like good scholars, friends that I know that follow this kind of thinking, and they would still laugh at Tim LaHaye and Hal Lindsey, but they're still dispensationalists. So they would say, okay, well, they've taken it to a ridiculous place, but There is
But,
futurist understanding, and they've got great points. Like they're good scholarly conversations that take place.
My question is this, we're talking about secondary and tertiary topics. Is this a core issue? Do you think, Jace or Travis? If you think like a dispensationalist or preterist?
In and of itself, I would say it's not a core issue because it doesn't deal with Jesus specifically.
Okay.
But I want to be careful. Like people ask me all the time, they say, they're asking me especially right now, what kind of church are you thinking about going to? What are you looking, what could you fit in? Somebody asked me that this morning. I'm like, well, I can fit in a lot of churches, but they won't necessarily let me fit in. That's the first thing. But the second thing is the kinds of churches that I don't think I could go to would be a church that does not understand that the kingdom of God is present, not just future. That's and you think, well, that's not that big of a deal. I think it's like the core of Jesus's message is I'm king now, not one day I'm going to be king in the future. So you better do all these things in order to get into that one day heaven kingdom. Like I'm king now, and you are in some sense seated in the heavenlies right now. That's so key to interpreting all of the Bible, I think. And anything else really, really messes it up, in my opinion. So I don't know if I want to say it's core, but it's right next to core. Like it's dangerous, really dangerous, I think, if you don't see it that way.
Which churches do have that in their doctrine? I know a lot of people individually have, the left behind scenario, but what churches have that specifically in their doctrine? I don't know any.
A good portion of non-denominational and Baptist.
God, Assemblies of God.
Really? Baptist?
Yeah.
GAG, pretty much. Yeah, they're dispensationalists for sure. I'm not saying that that's the wrong view, but
So because I've looked for a lot of church jobs in my life, you can see in their statement, and I look this, first thing I do is go down to number 12, where it talks about eschatology. And it says something about, I believe in a pre-tribulational rapture and a premillennial return of Christ. I'm like, okay, done. I can't fit there. Because I think they're putting too much emphasis on that to begin with, but also I think that's just not the way we should be thinking about things. And when we get to the tribulation, and when we get to the rapture, and when we get to the millennium, I'll talk a lot more about it. But I just think those concepts are really dangerous if we keep interpreting them as like specific literal things. Very dangerous. So I'm sorry, Travis.
Okay.
You asked great questions, and I jumped in to try to answer them. But is it
Let's
Jesus
jump to
or is
the-
it not Jesus? What do you say, Travis?
I think the false Christ makes more sense given the distinctions that are present and in context with the other horses and the other ones that it's put with. I think it's
When you take it
conquest.
across all, you're saying because of the other the other three riders. Is that your point?
So it's conquest, war, famine, and death and pestilence. They all go together, which we'll get to in a minute.
Okay.
So if you put Jesus, war, famine, and pestilence, one of the four is not like the other three.
What doesn't fit, right? Exactly.
All right, so I'm going to end up agreeing with you, Travis, but I want to push back anyway, because there is a sense in which it is like the other, right? Especially if your concept of Jesus as one who comes as avenging his people and getting judging and bringing his wrath finally on the earth, then for him to come with a bow in his hand and bring judgment. I mean, there's a lot of pictures of Jesus, of him coming with judgment. We think of Revelation, we're like afraid of it because it's Jesus coming, he's angry, and he's going to get even with the world finally. And if you see that, then him coming like that, then it makes sense that, the other things would come out of that. From him beginning the war, these other things are going to happen. So I think it can work. I don't think it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I end up disagreeing with myself, but
Sure. Well, I mean, to push back on the pushback,
Yeah.
the conquest is of everyone, not just, the non-elect and the other people that will be affected in the other riders. It also includes Christians are getting, so if Jesus is coming just to punish those who aren't Christians, these riders are punishing Christians and non-Christians alike, which we'll see in some of the more of them.
Hey, this is Todd. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Is it Todd? What's up, Todd?
Hi. Yeah, I know. I don't jump in much anymore. But I have a question. Not focusing on the horses or the colors. I want to focus on the punctuation because I'm in the ESV version, and at the end of it, they're like horse exclamation point, and even in Zechariah, it's like a horse, and like not just the white horse, but the red horse. The white is like a horse. So, a couple questions like why the exclamation, or I don't know if that's in your versions, and then within the original languages, those kind of would there been some kind of mark to say this is really big?
Exclamation point, yeah.
So mine
Is
has
this
that
just
in my
showing an
translation.
exclamation?
Mhm.
Talk, Fran, go ahead. We gotta do one at a time. What'd you say, Fran?
I said, is this just showing an exclamation, like come, and there came a white horse, and, an exclamation.
But of all the revelation that are like bizarre, to be like a horse, what's is there a significance to the punctuation?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's nothing in the Greek that
Mm.
has exclamation point. Like that's not a thing.
Uh-huh.
So it has to, it's just an interpretation that, yeah, I guess they're very excited about this horse that's coming. We're very afraid in ESV. I don't have
Well,
it in front of me.
it's almost like they said, you're gonna, so when you're gonna look, and when you look, oh, there was a white horse there, I mean, you're exclaiming at what you first saw.
Yeah. A horse.
Mine,
Yeah.
mine says four, Todd, mine says four living creatures, and it says come, and come in each one is in quotes.
I mean, if you
Uh-huh.
think about
The NIV has, there's an exclamation point after the comes, and there's an exclamation point after 3 of the 4 horses. The red one doesn't have one because it's not red horse, it's horse. And then it says a red one later. And after that, there's not an exclamation. But all the ones where it has color horse, there's an exclamation. So, but you're saying that that would not have been in the Greek, so that's something that the English translators would have added?
Yeah.
well, I'm just comparing it to another apocalyptic film, Twister, where it was more like cow, no exclamation. So clearly there's something.
Nice.
That's good. Yeah.
That was good. Yeah.
That's definitely an apocalyptic look at. Yeah.
All right, well, so let's move on to the second one.
That
Wait,
was
did
pretty
we
rich.
figure this out? Did we figure it out? Maybe we can't figure it out till we know what the others are. All right, go ahead.
I mean, we can keep going. Yeah, you want to keep, no, let's go and then we can circle back. So the second one is the red horse of slaughter. It's given a great sword. This one is war. And the reference to the word slaughter or slay is specifically used in a context where that always describes God's people being slain in Revelation, according to Dr. Dalrymple, to cite that commentator. This particular word is only used in Revelation to describe God's people being slain, except for one exception in 13:3, where it's the beast pretending to be Christ. So really, it's not an exception because it's the beast pretending to be Christ and pretending to be dead. And so this is his big thing to indicate that's like a huge thing that this judge, if you thought this judgment's on everybody else, it's probably not, because this word is specifically used as God's people being slain. So it's Christians being included. So he doesn't like to refer to these four set as judgments. And he just says in his words that this is what happens when humanity is in power: war, conquest, famine that we'll see next, and death. When mankind is left to its own devices, this is what happens. And we see that repeated throughout the Bible with Cain and Abel, Lamech, Nimrod, and on and on and on throughout the Bible.
I think that reiterates the argument for the first being a false Christ. That because you said conquest is not something that you're thinking of necessarily as a Christian. It's more of sacrificial love, like dying, more than conquering. Conquering in the way that's opposite of the world. So just to go backwards, to circle back to the argument for it being a false Christ.
See, now that's, so I want to bring up, because that's a really interesting, what you did, an exegetical point that we all do all the time, right? You interpreted this grid through how you understand Jesus already, not from this book, how he's introduced, although we've already seen that he is a sacrificial lamb, right? So that is there, but just your picture of Jesus already is one that is loving and tender and all that. But if we interpret it, like we jump back to the Old Testament, right, we come at this maybe a little bit differently. I mean, it certainly seems, I don't know if you agree with me or not, it seems like God is pretty wrathful sometimes. Like he gets kind of upset with both his people and the nations. If you read Ezekiel, right, it's constant, it's just woe after woe after woe. I'm going to come and kick your behinds. You're not listening to me. And even his own people. Right, Moses has to jump in between and say, God, don't kill your own people. That's not, that's not what you should be doing.
Well, I also think the development of, and I mean, like the development of the movement is you see this new covenant where he intensifies the law, but it's built around this. I guess you're right. I mean, you're this loving figure that's, the outsiders are in. It's like the upside down kingdom's here. And so it almost like, that's why I feel like a Marcion who wanted to get rid of the Old Testament. I mean, he did, because he's like, this God is doesn't make sense. I mean, that's totally against what we've been learning here, because obviously the Old Testament points to Jesus in many different ways. But I
want to, from that, I want to say, I think we're going to jump into that question, kind of, since as Travis is heading in that direction, like the difference between the literature and the reality, like what's the Old Testament doing and what's God really doing, which I think is huge. But I wanted to respond specifically, Josh, because I started again to play the devil's advocate, but I think you're right. Like, I think you should be interpreting the Bible through that lens. So you should be looking at Revelation from the picture of the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, and this upside down kind of kingdom. So I think you're doing exactly the right thing. I just wanted to draw attention to it. That's why some people come up with different interpretations, is because they see it. They may come from a more a power place. And so they like the God that they notice that, that goes into Jericho and destroys it. So they can see that Jesus would do that. Like, that's what he's planning on doing. I just want you to see both of those interpretive lenses. It all depends on what baggage you carry in as to what you're going to do with this text.
Very true.
All right, Travis, I know you have.
Put it in some context for that Old Testament. If you want to flip, who wants to flip to Ezekiel? It's easier to find in the Bible than Zechariah. Any volunteers? Go for it, Lisa. Ezekiel 14:21.
Just one verse.
Just one verse. That's all we need.
Okay. For thus says the Lord God, how much more when I send upon Jerusalem my 4 disastrous acts of judgment, sword, famine, wild beast, and pestilence, to cut off from it man and beast.
Sorry. Similar? No?
Mhm.
And he calls them judgments. At least
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
translation.
The sword, famine, wild beast, and plague. We've got sword. We're about to do famine. The plague, pestilence, wild beast are basically thrown in the last one. The only one we don't have is conquest. Slightly different, but pretty dang close.
Yeah, it tells you
No,
that
it
there's probably
isn't.
some cultural stream. Like, it's not just Ezekiel, maybe they're picking up on, but a cultural stream that is just around at that time of these four riders, these four judgments that are coming, that maybe everyone used that kind of language. And they may have had different ones, but these are terrible things that God brings or that God allows, maybe.
See, I mean, you can see where the other interpreters come from. We're thinking, well, you know, you look back at the Old Testament, here's some stuff in here. And this is, I mean, against Jerusalem too, but other places in the Old Testament, it's against, you know, other people. So,
So there can be judgments against God's people.
For sure.
Just wanted to throw that out there as you're about to make your argument.
Well, what does Rob Dalrymple say about that?
Travis?
that's why he doesn't like to call them judgments, is because they're against God's people. He likes to look at them as, what I say? I had it here a minute ago. Let me use language. This is what happens when humanity is in power, when humanity is just left to its own devices. So it's basically God staying out of humanity's way and letting humanity do what humanity does best, kill each other, and then all the, you know, the rest of it that we screw things up. Versus a judgment. This gets down to, what does a judgment mean? And so I think what he would say, if that's not a judgment would be God directly intervening and doing a thing to mankind, as opposed to allowing mankind to do bad things to mankind's self. But really, couldn't they both be judgments? I mean, this is really a question of semantics. And what do you guys think?
The Ezekiel passage is talking about judgment against Jews. Yes?
It's against Jerusalem. So it's against the city that probably has inhabitants of different ethnicities, but probably predominantly Jews, yes.
Let's remember, they're not Jews at this point. We just call them Hebrews or Israelites or something like that. Yep. So your question, Travis, is it intrinsic, direct? Is it direct or indirect retribution? Is God doing it, or is God just stepping aside and letting it happen? And can we call both of those things?
And is one of those things a judgment and one of those things not, or are they both potential judgments?
Well, I mean, that goes into, is God sovereign or is he not? I mean, if God's in control, then of all things, I mean, he's sovereign, then it's both judgment and retribution or wrath. If he's allowing it to happen, then that's a deep question. I don't know.
So I'll ask it like this then. When we see this word, do we think of God, wrath, do we think of God as angry, and then that leads to action?
Or just.
Okay, so you see it as just, but does it lead to action?
Eventually.
Or is the action, maybe I should be asking this, is the action direct? Does he do something? Is that what it means for God to be wrathful, that he comes and he throws lightning down, or whatever your image of God's wrath is? Or does it mean simply that he just steps aside?
He steps aside. He lets man do what man does.
Okay.
See, I think most often for me, when I hear things like God's anger or wrath, I think of direct action, or I think that's what other people think, you know.
Yeah, I think that is the normal, like, you know, connotative definition of wrath is we think that he's doing it. Right. So when we say God's wrath fell on his son, for instance, we think of God as killing Jesus.
Well, we think of wrath as being antithetical to love. And so if God is love, he can't be wrathful at the same time. And I think that is in direct contrast to what justice looks like. Justice doesn't always look like a form of love. If you look at the human condition, we're full of hate and we're unjust, we're unjust, and there's consequences to our actions, and this is for us to think that if God is sovereign, then this whole wrath actually the question of what God's wrath looks like doesn't mean it's God's like this punishing God, but it could be this he's wrathful in the sense of he's justful, or I don't even know if that's a word, but he's full of justice.
Yeah, but isn't there action and inaction? By not doing something, by not intervening, by letting man succumb to his own, his own destiny, which is really when man, takes power unto his own self, what's it lead to? Well, war, famine, disruption, destruction, right? If God just stands aside with that wrath, he's not intervening. He's not laying his hands on us. He's saying, my petulant children, I've taught you better. It's the opposite of come. Instead of saying, he's saying, come to me, come to my life, be with me, listen to my words.
My theological stance would be have a hard time accepting, and I am, and I'm working it out with fear and trembling, whatever. God being sovereign, yet stepping aside. It seems like a contradictory statement in itself.
What about our being created with free will, and our free will run riot?
I go back to the question of double predestination.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It's the same question though, right?
It is. Yeah, yeah.
Right. No, it's that was good, Lisa. Yeah, that's good. It's gonna be cool.
So do we want to try and tackle the Calvinist versus Arminian debate in Revelation chapter 6, verse 4?
You don't.
I think I'd probably rather keep it at the level of the literature instead of the theology, like stands back. But Josh, to say that God is sovereign, like I've never met a Christian who doesn't believe that God is sovereign, but they mean very different things by saying that. So there's a whole world of open theism that's out there, or relational theology that would say God is sovereign, but he doesn't know everything. He's in process like we are to some degree, and he can be impacted by his people. So all of that is like, is he sovereign in the sense that he knows everything and he like says this is what's going to happen next, or is he sovereign in the sense that like he's the ultimate creator, but he allows mankind to work and do what they want to do on their own? And so sometimes he lets them go, and he doesn't even know exactly where it's going to go, but he's going to, out of all the different directions that it can go, he's going to make sure it gets to that final thing.
That to me makes more sense, and it's process-esque. And I think that it allows for the Bible to move the way the Bible is wanting to move. I think, but I have a hard time in my circle even bringing up process theology or any type of open theism, and so I'm reticent to even comment on that. But yeah,
you should be. Yeah, you should be reticent. I was just opening an idea that was out there that maybe nobody knows about, but that is tempting.
Comment on it.
And
I can comment on that one.
You want to try comment?
Sure. So God's sovereign, God is love, God has always had his arms open, inviting us to do it, but he never forces us to do it. So we have to choose him. Show me a story in the Bible where God forced a man to do a specific thing, as opposed to invited a man through a call to action, and then the man responded to the call to action.
Actually, I can show you a bunch of those verses. Then you just have to,
we're good.
you have to interpret them. Like Romans 9 says, not to him who wills or runs, but according to him who has mercy. The fact that John speaks of Jesus wooing or calling, which you might translate as inviting in, but the word is actually wooing in the same sense that somebody throws a bucket into a well and pulls the water up. You don't like stand up at the top of the well and say, "Here, water, come on, we want you to come." No, you pull it. So there are some verses that seem to go in that direction if you want to understand those in the soteriological salvation sense of things. I think there are other ways to understand those, so I'm kind of with you. And I'm kind of with Josh in the sense that I'm struggling with that stuff too. But here's that this word wrath. I want us to at least think through that it's possible that the people who are writing in the Old Testament are thinking about wrath in a certain way because their understanding of their God comes from all the places around them. So they see a particular kind of God, and gods are like Zeus, right? They're like Artemis. They're like all these gods with lightning bolts who get ticked off at people. They're capricious, arbitrary sometimes. You're making noise, doggone it. Stop making noise. I'm going to flood the whole earth so you don't make noise anymore, right? Those are like the Babylonian epic of the flood, Atrahasis and Enkidu and all those, Apashtim, those stories all have to do with God being the gods being wrathful. And then it's pulled into the Bible and it's changed a little bit. The story's changed a little bit, but it still has a lot of the same God is mean almost feelings to it. And I wonder if that's just their way of understanding what's happening when things that are like naturally maybe, when those natural things happen. And so they say, this is how God is. He's upset with us and stuff. And so he does those things, which makes me wonder in the New Testament if there's still a primitive understanding of God. Of course there is, right? It's not going to be as exhaustive. I mean, it becomes more and more exhaustive because Revelation is progressive. We keep learning more and more. From the Old Testament Torah to the prophets to the New Testament, there's a movement that's going on there. Is it possible that they just didn't understand fully and that we have a much more full understanding by the time we get to the Gospels, for instance, of God's wrath? We still use the language of God's wrath, but it's not that he's angry, maybe. It's just that's the way they thought of it, because it looks like he's angry, but he's not angry. He's really just stepping aside and letting the consequences happen. This is what happens when I let you do stupid things, right? It'd be a father letting his son, right? Okay, if you're going to go to that party and get drunk, I'm going to step back, and it's going to be chaos. It's going to be a mess for you now.
Can I ask you this? If in our natural disposition is to murder, to be adulterous, and all these things, like God's not punishing the lion for murdering the antelope or the zebra, or for so it's like this natural way of somehow we're different, and it makes it different. And I'm trying to think, like, is it really that this is what humans do? Like we said, that we conquer, we war, there's war, famine, death. It's just what we do. I mean, I'm just trying to look at it in a different way.
Yep.
Like, trying to understand the human condition. It doesn't necessarily have to be. I don't know. I have to think about that more in order to get there. I'm trying to get there. Yeah.
So why do we go to war?
Because we have the haves and have not. Civilizations created this system where some people have and some people don't.
But it's not always that either. I mean, sometimes it's good intentions theoretically, but it's mankind thinking that we know better. Why did the Romans go to war? They went to war to bring the Pax Romana. They went to war to provide stability and peace, is what they said. So they thought they were doing a good thing, but mankind, so even when we think we're doing good, bad things end up happening. It's not that we're always doing it for bad reasons.
Hmm.
Very good point. So is this judgment or not judgment, or is this just a semantics thing? Is it direct retaliation? God, I'm going to pay you back. Is Revelation a pay you back scenario? Or is it a stepping aside and allowing them to run their course? Could it be both?
The issue I have, and I don't know if this is Lori, this might be off topic, but these natural consequences affect innocent people. You letting your child go to a party and get drunk and pay the consequences, but your child getting drunk might hurt an innocent victim, and God's allowing that to happen.
Does.
I mean, we have to kind of say he's allowing that.
And so that's where
He's all powerful.
And that's where I feel like so much of this comes down to your viewpoint of like, does God, it's the whole question of evil is what we're talking about again. Like, is God the lifeguard who can sit back and jump in and save every person? Or is God somehow not able to necessarily save every person, which is a controversial conversation to have. But that's the, by saying is God allowing bad things to happen, or bad things happening and God, can't or cannot stop them?
Is God limited in his power? Or, does that make him limited in his power if that's...
Yeah, is it a limitation to talk about things that God can't do? It's not necessarily a limitation to speak of those things. By the way, whenever the Bible uses the word
Instruments
almighty,
are limited. We're limited.
We're limited, yes. Whenever the word is used almighty, that's a translation that we choose, right? But it really just means mighty. So we're saying, well, it's God, so it's almighty. That word of omnipotence, like there's no omnipotence word. That's an English word that we use based on our theology that we impose on the text. I'm not saying he's not almighty. I'm just saying it's not quite that easy to figure out. Is it possible that God has limitations? Does he have logical limitations? Does he have limitations that he puts on himself that are based on his character? I mean, he can't sin. Is that a problem with God? Is that a limitation? I don't
Yeah, I
think
was
so.
going to say the Bible talks. There's different places where the Bible talks about what God can't do.
That's right. But that doesn't necessarily take away from his sovereignty, I don't think. And
Right.
it
Yeah.
might reframe our understanding of what sovereignty means. And maybe we need to do that. That's what this group's for, to ask those real questions.
I don't have an answer.
I'm sure you don't. No.
Travis, I assign chapter 6 to you. You need to have the answer. That's all. I mean,
All right.
This is
That's simple.
deep. This is deep, dude. Real deep.
Yeah.
all right, do you want to try another horse and then we'll jump back to it?
Oh yeah, should we do it? Should we do another horse? We got 10 minutes. One more.
Let's do it.
What do we get to one horse as the first horse, huh? My goodness.
We need 2 horses.
We're on the third one now. So
Okay.
the third horse is the black horse of famine or economic hardship, is what Dr. Dalrymple likes to refer to it as. You'll see the economic hardship and disparity and this was one of the questions that somebody specifically asked. What's this stuff about the economic stuff in here? So a little bit of background. So this horse, a famine, he's carrying scales. Scales are used for measuring grain. The 2 common grains to eat were wheat and barley. Barley was for the cheaper folks because it was cheaper, but it also wasn't as healthy, not as nutritious. So a denarius was a day's wages. That should get you a day of wheat for one individual, or a full day for a whole family of barley. So the numbers that are in here are reflect an 800% inflation rate. If you were to know the economics of the time, according to the commentators, there's 800% inflated price for wheat and barley, which means people are going to starve. So it's not so much that there's a famine or drought, but it's just that the inflation happened really, really bad, which happens a lot of times with war. Like sometimes maybe Russia invades Ukraine and prices of wheat go up, or gas and goes up. Like your gas bills are going to be higher this winter, in case you don't know, because there's a war in Ukraine. So we're experiencing this right now, and it disproportionately affects the poor. In the Roman Empire, 90% of the population was the poor, and most of the Christians were in that 90%. There were around 3% of the population that were actually rich. They all lived in Rome for the most part. And then 7% that, were decent, but they might have felt the pinch of inflation. And then everybody else was pretty much poor. And that 3% that mostly lived in Rome had crazy, extravagant, lavish lives that were heavily dependent on slaves and imports from outside of Rome. The Romans would actually lure the poor into Rome because they needed slaves, with the promise of free grain to everyone in Rome. So you didn't have to worry about starving. If you came to Rome, you just had to worry about being a slave. To afford this, to have all the grain, Rome said that they would buy it from everywhere else, but they made it a fixed price. And any of you that are good capitalists know control economics don't work very well a lot of the times. So what happened is the farmers stopped planting the wheat and they started planting other stuff, which made the prices go up even higher, and they made it scarcer. And so then when a famine does hit somewhere between Egypt, Israel, and Spain, which you're bound to have one somewhere, that makes the prices go even higher. And so famines were common in the Roman Empire. It's actually happening probably right now when this is being written by John. And it's going to affect everybody, elect, non-elect alike. So that is what is going on with the black horse, with the denarius, with the inflation, and a little bit of economics on the Roman Empire for you.
Did Todd just talk about a cow and just bounce? He's not even he's not even here anymore.
He disappeared after the cow thing. Yeah. Okay, so this one is a black horse. He's got scales in his hand, and he's talking about famine or economic, what do you call it? Economic disparity? Economic
or hardship, I think was the
hardship.
word. Yeah.
Which specifically hurts the poor, mostly because if we have 800% or 10 to 12 times your normal price, yeah, I mean, the poor can't do that. They just can't do it at all. The rich just suck it up for a little while.
And we do see, I forgot to mention, the oil and wine is spared, but oil and wine are luxury items that the rich are going to have. The poor can't afford those anyway.
Yep.
But another way that some of the commentators talked about is that this is a limited famine, to where like there may be a theme of not everything. It's not a total destruction. The oil and wine is left. Another thing to know is oil and wine are things that come from Asia Minor, where they're at. So they wouldn't have been imports. That's what the native agriculture is. The wheat and barley was coming from Ukraine and Egypt. So
this would be another argument, the way you're saying it right now, that this is probably not Jesus on that horse, because it's attacking, really it seems to be attacking the Christians and not the pagans. So if he's out to judge them, I mean, we're going to get in verse 5 or at the fifth seal, right? The how long are we going to continue to be tortured? And Jesus is going to say, hold on. basically.
And we will see a distinction between the Christian response and the non-Christian response in the fifth and the sixth seals. So, but yeah, but the first four seem to affect everyone.
So it seems also that that's an argument for it being a preteristic notion, because if it's happening, this is happening at most likely at that time. So this is good for that argument, instead of people looking to a future famine. Did I say that right? Preteristic?
Yes, preterist.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to just like, do you have enough time to do the fourth horse in 3 minutes?
Sure. So the fourth horse is just kind of a combination of the other three. It's like the pale horse of death. This is the what happens after everything else. So you had war, conquest, famine. Everybody's going to die, or a lot of people are going to die. This talks about specifically over 1/4 of the earth, which is a repeat of the limited loss potentially, if you're looking at that theme. Also, if you look at, this is going to be a literary increasing intensity as that comes on, where this is 1/4 here in the seals. In the trumpets, you're going to see 1/3. And then there's 7 thunders, and there's no specific description of that one, might be 1/2. And then the bowls are totality, so 1/1. So it goes 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, 1/1, everybody. So there's an increasing intensity as we proceed through Revelation. But yeah, the pale horse of death is just kind of a combination and final of the rest. The comparison we already read, Ezekiel 14:21. As far as wild beasts are referenced back in Ezekiel and other places as well. Yeah. And that's what I had on that one.
So
And then we'll see when we go next week, and we get to the fifth and the sixth, another literary fun thing is, and you might have started to notice it even with just like the length of the words, each of these, they start to get longer. So as far as increasing, so these were all 2 verses. The next ones will be 3 verses, and then there's a whole interlude. It's like a whole chapter. Like, so there's some fun literary stuff going on too.
Nice. Nice.
So we spent a lot of time arguing about like who the first horse was, or what this represented, and about wrath in general, whether that's a step back or a deliberate action forward. But I don't know if maybe that took away from the big picture. Remember, this is like a narrative. This is a story that John is presenting for you. So you don't need to figure out every little detail of everything to get the feel of what they're seeing. I don't know if you saw my Facebook post, but there's like 4 horsemen. You've seen a million pictures of the 4 horsemen, and they're not Jack, Jim, John, right? They're not those different kinds of alcohol that Travis showed us first, right? But you get the picture of these dark hooded people, like in Elf, you know, the horsemen in the park, or yeah, that was right. Yeah. Or in it's not that, or you know, the Middle Earth, the horsemen. That horseman idea, just picture what they're picturing. These dark horsemen coming in and just wreaking havoc. The readers should be like recoiling in fear. Obviously, they're just reading a story, but they're picturing this image of death and war and bloodshed and famine galloping down on them into their imagination. You should be reading this when you read this with like, I don't know, with fear, with intensity at least, right? Just this, yeah, there you go. Something like that. Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's why there's exclamation points.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, I mean, does that picture need that's exclamation points, isn't it? So when you say horse, yeah, that's an exclamation point.
I always think too, the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. You know, this type of like conception of having a healthy reverence for God.
Yeah.
And anyways.
Yeah, so next week, actually, I'm not totally sure what we're gonna do next week, because it's 9:15. We might end up just continuing on with this, but I might jump ahead and do chapter 12, just for fun, to help you see a little bit of what's coming, but also because chapter 12 is this story about a woman who has a child that a dragon wants to eat and destroy. And the woman escaping with the child, and so the dragon decides to attack the woman's children instead.
'Tis the season, right?
Tis the
Yeah,
season.
Christmas story.
Sounds like Christmas to me.
Yeah, so it's not technically Mary and Jesus, but it kind of is. Like there's something going on here to telling that story. So I thought we might do that as just an aside, and we'll probably skip the next week after that because it's just 2 days after Christmas, and my guess is some of you are going to have family doing that. Maybe we need a little bit of a break, but next week we're on. So yeah.
So next week is maybe skip it to 12, maybe the 5th and 6th seals. You have to find out. And then we're probably off the 27th. FYI. And any final words of wisdom before I turn the recording off, boss?
No, I think all my wisdom is gone. You may turn off the
All
recording.
right.